So you should all be seeing an Excel spreadsheet on your screen, very simple spreadsheet. And what I mean by lookup function is a function that enables you to look up something, match an item on a table that you indicate. And this is my example table right here. And say, okay, I would like to look up the number 7, and then return to me the information in the second column, which in this case is 6%. So that's the idea. I'm going to show you a number of different examples because that's the best way, I think, to understand it. So here we have a very simple payment function. And a payment function, as you probably know, depends on the amount of the loan or the principal and what the interest rate is and what the term is. So we're saying here that we have a payment function that's indicating that. But let's say I do not want to, actually I realize here that I should be saying the rate has to be divided by 12. And I forgot to do that. Okay, so let's say that I, instead of having to fill in the interest rate, maybe I have a large table, even though this is a rather small table, I have a large table that has different interest rates that depend upon what your credit rating is. So I have a little table here that indicates different credit ratings, and the higher your credit rating, the less your interest rate. And maybe I wanted to look that up for me once I fill in the credit rating. I wanted to tell me what the interest rate is and therefore what the payment is. So I am going to indicate in here for the interest rate that I wanted to look up what the credit rating is on this table and then give me that information in here. Okay, so I'm going to create a VLookup, V for vertical, because we lay out our things vertically in general. And so I'm going to go to the formulas on the ribbon, and I'm going to go to the lookup and reference functions. And you can see there are quite a few of them, including H for horizontal lookup and just plain old lookup, and then VLookup at the bottom, which is by far the most popular. So I'm going to say, here's my function arguments. What value do I want to look up? I want to look up this, whatever value is typed in this cell. And where do I want to look it up? I want to look it up on this table. And you can either include or not include the heading items here. It doesn't matter. It works either way. And then what column? When they talk about the column index number, it means what number column do you want to return information from? In this case, we only have 2 columns, and we're looking up here on this first column, and we want to return information from the second column. So that would be column number 2. So here's a case in which you type in the number of the column. You do not point and click at something. And then what this range lookup means is, do you want it to only give you an answer if there's an exact match, or do you want it to find the closest if it's not exact? So in this case, I might say, well, I don't need it to be an exact match. What if the credit rating is 6.5? So if I don't need it to be an exact match, I can leave it blank because it's a true-false, and if you leave it blank, it assumes true. So I'm going to say OK. And here we have 7%. And the reason we have 7% is that a 5 is here. And if I look up a 5 here, you can see it returns 7%. So now if I then type instead a 10, it immediately changes it to 4.5% because it's looking up on this table. Now, of course, this table could be in a different sheet. It could even be on a different file, assuming I have that file open. Now, I wanted to look at a few other things. What if I put a number in here that is higher than any of the numbers on here, like 20? What if your credit rating is super, super duper? It only can drop back to the highest one on the table. So it'll give you 1.5%, no matter how big the number is. What if I have a number that's lower than what's on the table, like 0.5 instead of 1? Then it says, I don't know what that is, not applicable, because I can't drop back. There's nothing to drop back to. Okay, and what if, and then because it has to be able to drop back to something, this first column that you're depending on to find your match has to be in ascending order. Otherwise, you're going to get information that's not correct. So you always have to have that first column, that unique ID, some kind of an identification item in a ascending order. And one thing I also want to mention is, what if we didn't tell it needed an exact match? So what if I have something like 8.5? Then it goes to, it drops back. It doesn't go forward, it always drops back. So it gives me the 8%. Even if I have something like 5.9, which we know is closer to 6 than 5, but it will drop back to the 5. So that's how it behaves. So you just have to be aware of that. Okay, so that is one example. And I'm going to go and pick up another example in a different file. So here's a file that has a little more information, including more different fields or columns of information, although there's not that many records. It only goes up to 90-something records. Okay, so it's employee number. That's our unique identifier, and that's in ascending order. And then it has names and date of hire and hours and gross pay and so forth. One of the things to make this easier, because you have to select the range each time, is if you want to name that range. And I have done that here, and data is the name of the range. So data includes all of this information. Okay. And a lot of times how we look this stuff up is we do have a different sheet that we want to look up information on. And so in this case, I'm using a different sheet. And just to show you, this is just one of the particular ID numbers, the employee ID numbers. And let's say we're looking for pay and hours and benefits. So the pay is the 10th column, the hours is the 8th column, and the benefits is the 7th column. Okay, so I'm going to create VLookups, because again, we're looking down vertically to match that employee ID number. And I can either go to the formulas, lookup and reference, and VLookup. Next time I'm going to show you another way to do that. So I'm looking up the value here. In other words, whatever ID number I type here. The table array is now data, and that's obviously a lot easier than going back to the other sheet and selecting it all. And the column, the first one was for pay, and that was column number 10 in our table. And the range lookup, in this case, I do want an exact match, because if it's just a number that's close to this number, the employee ID number, that won't do. I need it exact, so I have to type in the word false here. And it tells you that right here in the explanation. If you want to find an exact match, put in false. And it actually gives me a number right here. And if I say OK, 620 is the gross pay. Now, this is AS12. Let's go back here and look for AS12. And here it is, the 620. And I'm going to look for hours, and I'm going to look for benefits. And that's 40, and it's DH. So I'm going to create a formula here to do that. And if I know that it's an equal VLookup, I can start typing in equal V. And as soon as I start typing it, there's my lookup. Now, if I know after I've done this a lot of times how to fill this in, I could just type it in. But if you want to see that dialog box, you can press that little insert function button, and there you get your dialog box. So again, I'm looking up the value here. My table array is data. My column index number, we're looking for hours, and that was column number 8. And my range lookup, again, I want to type false because I want only an exact match. And here it's giving me my answer, and there's my 40. So, and of course, I could copy this formula and then just adjust the column number, but I want to give you more of a chance to see how it works. So I'm just starting to type the function, and then I'll double click on it, and I could just put the function in here and type it in, or I could say I'd like to see my arguments box, and I'm looking up what's in B2 in this case. My table array is data, and my column index number here was 7. That's the number of the benefits column, and again, false. And there I have. So I have 40 and DH, and this is A AS12, and I still had that highlighted, so here's the 40 and the DH. Now, if I take another, here's the beauty of this. If I now take another logical employee number, I just take another number, I go to my lookup table and I paste that in, it automatically changes all of them. Oh, the same 620. GA49, let's make sure. Yes, it just happened to be the same, and 40 and a different here. So I could now type in any valid number that it can find here. If I make up a number that is not on there, like, you know, WA222, it's just going to tell me NA because it can't locate it. Okay, so that's a little bit about how it probably would be more practically used, where you have your lookup in a different place, and you make sure that you set up the a range name for your the area, the table that you're going to look up. Okay. So we also have, I wanted to show you that the lookup function is frequently used, and this is just looking up the data. Again, that's in the first one, and giving us the answer. But next to it, what I've done is I've used a lookup, but used that as a nested function within an if function. And it might be a little hard to read it up here, so I have typed it down here in a little bit larger. So the whole lookup function is here. All right, so lookup false, so that's the original function. But what I've done is I've nested it within an if statement, so that if that is true, if it's greater than 800, that's what I put in, then give me a high salary, type in high salary. If it is not true, if it's not greater than 800, put in low salary. Okay, so if I do this and fill this down, it's looking at each one of those ID numbers, employee ID numbers, and it's judging whether they're greater than 800 or not. So this one's greater, it gets high salary. Most of them are low, but the ones that are high, excuse me, are over 800. So not only is the lookup function itself very powerful, but it's frequently used in conjunction with others as part of a nested statement, which can give you even more information. Okay. So another feature that we might want to use this for in practicality is, I'm going to go back to this one, but look at a different sheet here. So sometimes we have a list of items, like here's ID numbers for different reps for whatever, and then down here is another list. Now I'm giving you a very visual, small example so that you could see both lists at once, but it might be a situation where you have a huge list, let's say it's an inventory list with item numbers or something that might be several hundred rows long, and then you get another list and you want to see what on the first list does not appear on the second list, you know, what does not match. So you can use lookup for that function as well. So I've created here, it's doing a lookup on this first item here, this first ID number, and then it's saying, look that up down here on this list, right? And notice that the item on that list is made into an absolute reference because it has those dollar signs in front of the range indicators. Okay, whoops. All right, so it's made into an absolute reference, and it's also checking something that's a little bit different. It's checking for column 1. This is the column that it's both looking up in and it's also checking for it. I think I have this in a little bit larger. No, I don't have it enlarged. Okay, so it's checking for whether it's going to take this number and then all subsequent numbers when I autofill it down, and then check over here to see if they're in that other list. So if I do this, you see what it's done is this the first number does appear on the other list, but the second number does not. So it's giving me an NA, and the other numbers do, but this number does not. Okay, even if the numbers are not in the same order, it doesn't matter, because this one with the 088 is the third from the bottom, and here it's on the bottom. But that's okay. It's checking all of the numbers one at a time as I pull it down. So that would certainly save anybody a great deal of time if you had a huge list that you had to check and see what doesn't appear on the other list that at first glance looks like a match. Okay. Now, I did mention that there's an VLookup in addition to a VLookup, and I wanted to give you an example of how that could work as well. So I have another file here with a good-sized list. It's only going down to 75, but it has quite a few columns as well. And this concept here is that across the top in row 2, it is giving you the years from 99 to 2010, and going down in column A are model numbers. So the concept of this exercise is that maybe this is an electronics company, and whatever electronic doodad you need a part for, you'd have to tell the person, oh, it's a 2005 issue, and it's model number 500, and then they would be able to tell you what the part is. But rather than have to always go across and down and find that, it would be nice to be able to build a formula whereby you could simply type in the year, the model, and you get the part number. It would be a lot faster and more accurate than using your eye to judge. Now, one of the first things I need to do here is to freeze the pane so that when I scroll down, I can see the years, and if I should scroll across, I can see the models. So I'm going to put my cursor here, because when you freeze the panes, it always freezes above, and it always freezes to the left. And I'm going to go to the View tab and say Freeze Panes. And now you can see those lines go all the way across, and when I scroll down, you still see that, and if I should scroll to the right, you still see the models. So there you go. Okay, so here's what we're going to do to build this. In B77, we're going to type, I'm just going to use 2010, which is the last year, so it'll be easier to find. And then in B78 for model, I'm going to enter model 300, just as an example. Now, if we go up and look at 300 and 2010, you get 803. So when we put in our formula, we'll expect to get 803. And notice also that 300 is the 1, 2, 3, 4th row in our data set. And I don't know no, I haven't named this yet. So let's also name this data set. So I clicked on the first cell, and then I'm going to hold Shift and click on the last cell, the opposite corner, to select it all. And then I'm going to go here and call this data. It's just my default for any kind of data set. Okay. So I've done that now, and here's the deal. If I were to go here and hit data, it selects the whole shebang. All right, so that's the idea. Now, so I've said, now I'm going to build my formula here, and I'm going to build it as an VLookup just to illustrate how that works. So again, I could go to formulas, and I could go to lookup and reference, and this time I'm going to pick VLookup. Or I could have started to type in equal HL, and it would have given me VLookup. So what value do I want to look up? I want to look up the year. And what is my table array is data. And what is my row number? We saw that that was the 4th row. And I do want only an exact match. It's pretty important because I'm talking about what part people need. And when I say OK, I get 803. And as we saw earlier, if we go from model 300 to 2010, I get 803. So that has worked, and that's the HLOOKUP is just, you're just telling it horizontally what you need as opposed to vertically. So, you know. Now, let's say that I change the year. And if I change that to, let's say, 2000, it changes the number to 942. I'm still using model 300, so let's check that out. So model 300 in 2000 is 942, so that works fine. But what if I change the model? I'll just make it 3800 because that's the one on the bottom, and you can see that it did not work. It did not change. And why is that? Because in our formula, we typed in that it was row 4 of our data set, and I haven't changed that, so it's still looking at row 4. So that's not going to work. Okay, so it needs to have, it needs to know the row number. Now, instead of counting the row number each time, we can change the function so that instead of having a row number in there, it's going to find a match. Okay, so we're going to use the function. So again, it's nesting. We're going to find a match for B78. Okay, and just a sec here. Okay, B78. I'm sorry. Comma, that's what I'm looking for. And then we're going to do A2 to A through A75. And that represents all of these model numbers. The first one is an A2, the last one is an A75. And then we have to end our parentheses there. So we're saying to find a match in this column for what row number I'm putting in. And when I say OK, it now finds 327. And if I go to year 2000 and model 3800, here's the 327. So because I've put in, I've nested this function, I've nested the match function within the lookup, I am now able to say, okay, let's change this to 2005, and then let's change the model to 3200, and let's see what happens. 3200, 2005 is 789, and there it is. So now, because I've built that match in, it is automatically going to look to see what row number that I've chosen when I put in this model here, and it works both ways. So it's actually finding vertically and horizontally, which is kind of cool. Okay. So let's look now. I think I've done that already to explain that part over here. Okay, I have one more file to show you. And that is a little bit more extensive in terms of the look of this, about products and sale dates and ship dates and unit price and quantity and so forth. And there's, again, I haven't made the list too long here, so the list only has maybe 90 items on it. And we're going to go out here and look at a little area that has been set up to find information about each item. And here's the key, is the order ID. Get rid of that. Here's the order ID number. So if I type in an order ID number, there's actually on that, that's the first highlighted item. And then what happens here is it's finding the right, this has a nesting also, but basically the VLookup is finding the item that I typed in here, N7 is here. Here, you can look at it down here, it's a little clearer. And then data is my whole data set. I've just named the data set. Okay. And then 9 is the column number for the appropriate item, whether it's product or, in this case, unit price. And then I want an exact match, so it's false. So I have a regular VLookup here, but what I wanted to avoid, and the reason it got more complicated here, is that if I type in an order number that is incorrect, and I'm just making up a number here. No. Why are we doing that? Oh, because that's a formula. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry. I should be typing, no, I should be typing the order number here. Something has gone amiss here. Let me just undo a bunch of things. Okay, so the idea is if I type in an incorrect order number, what happens is normally I would get this, NA, which doesn't tell people it's not applicable. It doesn't tell people anything much. So what I've typed in to avoid that here is that I've nested the lookup within a function that says that's an if function, and also is NA. So if this is not applicable, if that's true, then put in the text incorrect order ID. And if it's not true, just use the lookup. So this is this part at the end is just the regular lookup. This is just my normal, you know, lookup N7 in data and give me the response in column 9 and give me an exact one. So that's just the regular. So I said, if my lookup results in a not applicable, an NA, if that's true, then type in incorrect order ID. If it's false, then just do the regular lookup so that I avoid seeing this kind of thing instead of this. That's all. And if I move that down, if I copy those in, and I would just be actually correcting the column number to reflect the product here or the quantity here, but basically if it was incorrect, I would get this. That's the incorrect order ID. So that's what we're doing there. Now, if it's having me look that up in N7, which is here. So if I were to put in whatever order number, any correct order number, so I'm just going to copy one that's on the sheet, and then I'm going to paste that here, well, then it gives me the information I want. It gives me the unit price, the product, the quantity ordered. I could have it pull out any information from here, and of course this could be on a different sheet, or it could even be in a different file if this file was open at the time. And that is NA function is actually a true-false function, and you could find it here in more functions, informational, just to let you know, and here is NA. And on any of these functions, if you need more information or would like to see another example, always on every function there's a help on this function. And when you go to help on this function, it always takes you to a rather nice lengthy explanation. It describes the function, it gives you examples of the syntax, and it always gives you at least one example. So they're showing you the different information functions, and then they're giving you examples of the different ones. Okay, so the same thing would be true if you type in a VLookup. If you're not quite sure, even after watching our video here, if you're not quite sure how this works, you can get help on that function. And with each new version of, they even give you now certain video previews. So with each new version of, whoops, which I did not mean to start up, which they always are expanding and making clearer what the help and what the examples are. So here they give examples here, several of which would be similar to what I showed you. So that's a little bit about VLookup, HLookup, and how you can use lookup to nest things and make that really quite a bit more powerful. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, please, you can indicate that in your chat room. I asked about emailing these. I'm not sure I can email these samples to everybody who's on the line, but what you can do, as I said, is look at some of those examples, and you can actually highlight the examples they give you in the help and paste it into a blank sheet, and that should be very similar kinds of things to what I was telling you. Okay. So thank you for listening, and I hope that this is going to be helpful. See you in a month or so.